Welcome back to History Class with Dr. W and our continuing discussion of Vietnam. In our previous lectures, we've talked about the Chinese influence during the early period of Vietnamese development. In this lecture, we're going to focus in on the growing movement for independence and the decline of Chinese power as that independence movement took root in the 10th century. In the 10th century CE, Zhao broke free from the Chinese Empire and claimed its independence. So how did this happen? Well, there are a number of factors that contribute to it. In the early 900s, the Chinese Tang dynasty began to crumble and weaken. The imperial hold on its distant provinces faltered. With the Chinese center faltering, local strongmen began to seize more power. Resistance came from within the colonies themselves, not from outside invaders like the Mongols. In 939, a high-standing general in Zhao named Wo Qian rallied his army and beat back an attack by Tang forces to secure independence. Soon, Wo Qian and his men referred to their own nation of Dai Viet, or Greater Viet. The rise of Wo Qian was aided by other groups challenging Chinese rule in different regions. The Tang dynasty was threatened by many such groups, including the Khmer and the Cham, seafaring people centered in coastal regions, but extending into Laos and Cambodia, who were most influential from the 700s to 1200s CE. Wo Qian's consolidation of power was quickly challenged, both from within and from without. Expansionist rulers in Khmer and the Cham pushed their boundaries further into Viet lands. And the local warlords and strongmen from which Wo Qian had risen continued to exert their own influence. Civil war between a dozen or more of these local warlords reigned for nearly a century. Finally, in 1009 CE, a leader named Li Tai-to emerged, consolidated power, and forged a dynasty carrying his family's name. Even as he consolidated power, Li Tai-to confronted serious challenges. To what extent should he rely on previous power structures, especially those established by the Chinese? Or to what extent should he start with something completely new? How could he claim political legitimacy? Without a lineage to fall back on, Li Tai-to and his followers began to create a mythic past that supported their political needs. They literally created rulers and stories that had never actually existed to create their own history. They also borrowed much from the era of Chinese rule to legitimize themselves. They actually called themselves Han and utilized Confucian systems of fealty to maintain control. The challenge here, unlike those who escaped Roman rule at the end of the Roman Empire, was that China still existed and hovered nearby. To claim too much connection to China might invite the return of Chinese rule itself. Li Tai-to also attempted to utilize many of the local religions, myths, gods, and legends to connect with the people in each region. He sought out stories of various gods or heroes that seemed to support his political beliefs and needs, and used them to rally support among the people. And finally, the Li dynasty undertook public projects to increase support. They built roads, canals, dikes, and supported agriculture. Under Li rule, harvests tended to prosper, and the people enjoyed a steady rice supply. Even though it was able to establish a royal identity, history, myths, and ceremonies, and back it up with military power, the Li dynasty never fully put down the resistance of local strongmen. It lasted from 1009 to 1225 CE. At the same time as the Li dynasty flourished, centered around Hanoi and inland regions. A largely separate culture took root along the coast, powerfully influenced by the Chinese Song dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1279 CE. The coastal cities and ports were hubs of commercial activity and international influence. The export of Chinese ceramics and silks fueled a robust trading economy and supported the introduction of a host of new ideas from China and other parts of the world. Coastal cities, far more than Hanoi and inland provinces, featured a multitude of languages, new ideas, products, and technologies. The introduction of different religions, such as Hinduism, technologies like the printing press, and music, arts, culture, and literature from other nations. It is from this more coastal-oriented region that the next dynasty arose, ultimately supplanting the Li dynasty. This was the Tran dynasty, which reigned from 1225 to 1406 CE. Under the Tran dynasty, while the capital remained in Hanoi, cultural and political thought shifted more towards the coast. The Tran struggled against outside influences and attackers, including the Cham, the Mongols, and eventually the Chinese. The Tran dynasty never fully established itself under this constant wave of challenges, and eventually succumbed to a new wave of Chinese attacks launched by the Ming dynasty in 1406. In our next lecture, we'll talk about that conquest under the Ming dynasty and the reassertion of Chinese control in Vietnam.